Chair, recently our Optus, comrades and friends. I am speaking in my capacity here as President of the Congress of Trade Unions, and I think that it would be only fair to say in that context that we would not have unanimity in the Congress in relation to the issue of the particular economic system which prevails in Cuba. But we would have unanimity on the issue of the right of the Cuban people to self-determination. And I think we would as well have a degree of perplexity as to why it is that the greatest military and still economic power in the world is so preoccupied with the threat posed by a tiny poor nation off its shores, especially in the years since the collapse of the Soviet Union. And it is important, I think, to reflect for a minute on the substance of that, because of course, as we all know, and as has been stated by Comrade Martin, who spoke a minute ago, the Cuban people have contributed enormously over the years to the struggle for the liberation of oppressed people across the globe. But it's hardly credible anymore to suggest that the people of Cuba, in their current distressed state, present the possibility of launching an invasion of the United States, or for that matter of launching nuclear weapons into its major cities. And I've heard spokespersons for Cuba many times over the past 15 years or more highlight the absurdity of that and argue cogently and cohesively and vociferously that the Republic of Cuba poses no threat whatsoever to the United States. I actually don't share that view. I don't share the view that Cuba poses no threat to the United States. Or at least, I don't share the view that the Republic of Cuba presents no threat to those in ascendancy in the United States of America. Because the subtlety of the threat is not presented in terms of an alternative military power or in terms of weapons of mass destruction, but in terms of the alternative. Because the threat that is posed by Cuba and its survival to those in ascendancy in the United States is expressed in terms of the beacon of light that it provides, particularly to all those struggling to find a better, fairer way in Latin America in particular, and those in the countries of Central and Latin America who are determined to oppose imperialism, and to oppose oppression, and to assert their right to self-determination in the world. But it is actually, I think, even more subtle than that. Because I always recall a discussion I had with a young man I know well, who spent a year in Cuba. And he went to see Utopia, and he came back with some criticisms. And he described the privations of ordinary life in Cuba. And he described the implications of the shortages of things that we take for granted. And he described as well, I think, the consequences of the sclerosis that is induced by the absence of a market and a one-party state. And concern around these issues are not, incidentally, the preserve of the right. Rosa Luxemburg engaged in this debate with Lenin about this question of the dialectic in all of this. But I recall, after he voiced these criticisms at length, saying to him, well, so you don't believe in socialism anymore? On the contrary, he said. Can you imagine what it would be like here if we were embargoed for 50 years? Can you imagine what society and life would be like if our response was informed by the value system which prevails in our society, as against the value system which prevails in Cuban society? And therein, comrades, therein lies the subtlety of the real threat of the continued existence of Cuba as an independent people in society to those in ascendancy in the United States of America. Because every day that Cuba survives is another day in which the possibility of the alternative of a social and economic system based on the principles of social solidarity present a threat to those who benefit by an economic system driven by the imperatives of greed. And at this moment in the history of humanity, at a moment in which, temporarily at least, the particular economic model which asserted itself 30 years or more ago with the ascendancy of Reagan and Thatcher has been exposed, when we are still in a space in which humanity is searching for the route to a secure future, to a stable future, to the progress of the human species, the existence of a state, of an independent state, a tiny independent state, off the shores of the United States of America, which has managed to uphold the principle of government in accordance with the principles of social solidarity, despite being embargoed for 50 years, upholds the possibility for all of humanity of a better, fairer way than the way that is presented through the dictatorship of the market. And that is the real threat posed by the existence of Cuba. And that is why it is critical for all of us who love freedom, who understand the value of freedom in the real sense, who understand it in terms of freedom from want and from misery. That is why we pay homage to the Cuban people, to all those who have struggled to ensure the independence of Cuba. And that is why we must dedicate ourselves, in whatever little we can do, to ensure that in reality and in essence, Cuba's right to self-determination is respected. And one of the very interesting things I find about the justification for the continued embargo on Cuba by the United States, leaving aside all the nonsense about human rights and democracy, I suspect there are human rights issues, incidentally, in a one-party state. And there is a question about whether or not you can have true democracy in a one-party state. But leaving aside all those issues, leaving aside all of them, leaving aside the fact that these people who are so committed to human rights and democracy, to condemn 11 million people to continued misery, whilst at the same time trading with Saudi Arabia and China and other regimes in the world which abide by different principles and a different system, purely by reason of the fact that they're powerful trading nations. Leaving aside all these things, the reality is, and the people I met in Cuba said it to me when I was there, if these people really believed in the superiority of their system, if they really truly believed that the Cuban people were desperately hoping for the end of the current administration, why don't they just dismantle the embargo? Why don't they simply allow free trade? Why don't they allow the free movement of people? And it will wash the current administration in Cuba away within a very short time. And the reason, of course, is because they don't believe what they're saying. And the reason, of course, is because unless they can strangle the independent Cuba, it will continue to exist as a beacon of light for all those in Latin America in particular who are striving to assert the independence of their countries and their people. And more particularly, it will serve as an alternative to the system of administration of people, which is driven by the imperatives of greed. And it will uphold the prospect of the organisation of people, of the organisation of humanity, on the basis of the principles of social solidarity. And I'm very glad, as President of Congress, to be here to participate in this event, which is about, insofar as we can as internationals, respect and rededicate ourselves to the right of the Cuban people to self-determination. Because in doing so, we are respecting the right of every people, including our own, to self-determination. Today has been an interesting day. It's regrettable that we did not have more people here. One of the things that I find in relation to Cuba and the Latin American situation in general is that there is a sense here that it is very far away. And the reality is that in the context of the collapse of the economic model imposed through the ascendancy of Thatcher and Reagan, it is not far away at all. It is actually next door. But that's not the sense in which it's understood. And we do have a responsibility, all of us. Whereas we're not unanimous in our view on every aspect of things. We do have a responsibility to encourage people, to encourage union members, and to encourage people in progressive organisations in society to understand the alternatives presented, to understand progress in relation to healthcare and education and society that can be made by the employment of a system of economic organisation, notwithstanding 50 years of embargo. And I want to compliment the organisers of today's event. I want in particular to thank our guests, Ray and Aldo, and Maria, and in particular, and with great respect, Colonel Victor Drake, who is, of course, not just a Cuban hero, but a hero of humanity. And I invite Jack to read the declaration. Thank you all.